Welcome to the Magic Book channel and thank you for joining us for a video featuring our new original story. The final preparations for the wedding of Brad and Natalie were in full swing. A formal wedding is no small matter, and on top of that, the groom and bride decided to do things even more thoroughly. They planned to have a church ceremony, scheduling everything for the same day. They just had to manage to make sure everything was perfect. Natalie's parents, Helen and Nicholas, were run off their feet, yet there were still unresolved issues. So, exactly 1 week before the big day, it was decided everyone would gather at the older generation's country house to discuss everything one more time. Helen, Natalie's mother, kept stealing glances at her future son-in-law. Sometimes her gaze was still sharp. She thought, this Brad seemed like an open book, simple, straightforward, always kind to Natalie. So why did her heart ache as if he had some hidden flaw? One she couldn't see. She would have to talk to her husband, Nicholas, about her doubts. Maybe he could come up with something sensible. Nicholas and Helen had been married for almost 30 years themselves and still adored each other. They had built their fortune together, penny by penny. It was funny to say, but Helen herself had started her business writing tests for correspondence students. She had already graduated from the Food Institute, had just returned from maternity leave, and didn't know where to find a job that wasn't too dusty and paid reasonably well. Outside the window, the infamous, turbulent 90s were in full swing. Unemployment was everywhere. Former teachers and engineers were selling all sorts of junk at markets just to survive. But Helen, you could say, was lucky. People won't starve in any era. They'll always strive for something better. The Correspondence Food Institute survived, even thrived quite well. The capital's university trained professionals in food technology and high-class chefs. The students all already worked somewhere near food products and were willing to pay a natural fee for the tests Helen had access to. While others had mice dying of boredom in their empty refrigerators, Helen brought home full bags from work. The professors didn't scrutinize their students' credit work too closely. Repetitions in term papers and reports? For heaven's sake, what new things could be invented in sausage production or bread baking? So the assignments were as similar as twin brothers. So Helen felt absolutely calm. The slightly pungent cheese, smoked sausage, black caviar, tender ham she was now slicing for their breakfast with Nikki, these were just pleasant compliments from the students to the understanding lady sitting in the dean's office handling assignments. It was all fair and square. Some got grades in their record books, others got a delicious dinner with delicacies. The principle of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours had never been abolished. They both always remembered that hearty era in the family's life with a smile. Helen was able to help her husband a lot with starting his business. While she accepted food offerings and envelopes with cash, Nicholas was forging the foundation for their future material well-being. Now Nicholas had a solid company dealing with container freight transportation by rail. A stable income allowed them to secure a reliable home front. No mortgages or housing-related loans. An apartment in the city center, a country cottage with a large plot. Prestigious cars idled in the garage. They both loved to drive themselves for business, without involving hired drivers. They had also settled on gifts for their daughter's wedding. A studio apartment in a new residential complex with all the infrastructure, from an underground garage to a playground and swimming pool. For the future son-in-law, an expensive present in the form of a stylish foreign car. Let Brad not think they spared anything for their daughter's happiness. Helen and Nicholas also had another ace up their sleeve. A Mediterranean coast tour. Let the newlyweds remember their honeymoon. Brad came from a modest, simple family. It was unlikely his parents would give him anything more than an envelope with money, and that one would probably be thin. Helen and Nicholas weren't actually snobs who, having become rich, forgot where they started. Their main concern was the happiness of their only daughter, Natalie. Was she happy with Brad? They love each other, and that's fine. And if they occasionally made remarks about some material shortcomings of the future son-in-law, it was without malice. If they were sure Brad would be devoted and faithful to their daughter, they would turn a blind eye to the rest. Diamonds in the rough. For now, Brad worked as a fitness trainer at a club. But he could change his field, try himself in his father-in-law's company, especially since he did have a higher education diploma, even if it was currently gathering dust in a desk drawer. Natalie always fondly remembered her first meeting with Brad. All girls love it when a true hero saves them from something unpleasant. That's exactly what happened. Natalie loved to dress like a princess for a stroll, preferring that style. Some romantic dress or a ruffled sundress. Her voluminous hair was gathered with luxurious hairpins into a sort of iconically feminine, aristocratic updo. Sometimes she even wore an elegant hat. On her feet, sandals or shoes on high wedge soles. No, she was absolutely not an old-fashioned girl shunning jeans with big holes in the knees or oversized sweatshirts. She could leave the house in any style of clothing. It all depended on her mood at the moment and, of course, the purpose of her outing into the world. At work, you could only find Natalie dressed in strict office classic style. Natalie didn't look for her place in the sun outside her father's company. Why should she? Smart engines of progress, meaning professional advertisers, are needed everywhere. Someone had to promote and advance the family company. For that, a bright, smart official website would be useful, and catchy slogans on billboards around the city wouldn't be superfluous. Natalie handled her duties perfectly and was a respected person in the company. Not at all because she was the boss's daughter. The young woman herself was a first-class specialist. She didn't have to hide behind her dad's back. In addition to her attractive appearance and clear mind, Natalie was a kind-hearted person and a loyal friend. She never lacked invitations to go somewhere with a group of young people. But to the kaleidoscope of parties and outings, she more often preferred solitude. She loved to read something that would give her food for thought, and she often drove out of the house in her little car to speed briskly through the surroundings. And this time, when fate brought her together with Brad, she was once again enjoying a fast drive until the fuel gauge plaintively asked for a gas station. Natalie flooded out of the driver's seat in all the splendor of her summer dress with large ruffles. She left her small purse with money and bank cards on the passenger seat. She'd be quick, plus she locked the car. Where would it go? Little did she know that at the gas station where she stopped to fill the tank, a gang of skilled teenagers was operating. They could break into cars of any make in a few seconds so virtuosically that even security cameras couldn't properly capture them. Brad and a colleague were transporting work equipment from a warehouse. They stopped at the gas station to stretch their legs and grab coffee with a pastry. Brad was sitting with a cardboard cup filled with a hot, fragrant drink, about to bite into an appetizing meat pie, when he noticed movement near a small, clearly feminine-looking red car. Two teenagers were fiddling with something near the passenger door. Then he saw a colorful woman's purse with a long strap appear in one of their hands. He acted lightning fast, jumped up from the table, and ran towards the red car. The petty thieves didn't even have time to process what happened before they were both lying on the asphalt, and the purse was lying nearby. They disappeared from the crime scene as if dissolved into thin air. Brad didn't chase them. He leaned against the car and waited for the owner to return her trophy. Natalie didn't keep him waiting long. The glass doors slid open. Before Brad's eyes appeared a lovely creature who didn't fit the picture of a girl who could drive a car. In his mind, those looked less romantic and were dressed more suitably for driving. And here, just the sandals on towering wedge soles was something else. How do you drive in those, even with an automatic transmission? He didn't know the answer, but he gladly handed Natalie her purse, explaining how it ended up in his hands. I managed to save your treasure. Did you not lock the door before going into the store? She looked him over from head to toe with a long gaze before answering. She thought. Not a man, but a veritable rock. As if every feature of his face was carved from granite with a rough chisel. And his figure, like a solid block. Look at those broad shoulders. And he's even getting worked up about something. Natalie focused her gaze on the lips of the giant, as she mentally named him, and listened to the end of his phrase. Ah, so he was saying she carelessly left the car unlocked, and young robbers took advantage, and he took her purse from them. She was so sure she had locked all the doors of her red crumb that she even doubted. Could someone really get inside so quickly in the time she was gone? Such a bruiser could have done it himself easily. However, such an unusual meeting was even romantic. And she decided to fluster her rescuer with a joke. Thank you so much for coming to the aid of a stranger. Only one thing excites me now. Will you continue with your good intentions? Because now, after all that has happened between us, as an honest man, you are simply obliged to marry me. Natalie laughed brightly at her own joke, but what happened next knocked her off her stride. The young man, who was almost 2 heads taller than her, suddenly easily went down on one knee, stretched out his hand with her purse, and said, My name is Brad. You struck me at first sight, right in the heart. Now I will never be able to forget you. Moreover, I won't be able to live without you unless you promise me we will see each other every day. I offer you my hand and heart. I'm not rushing you for an answer. I give you exactly 1 year to think and give me your answer. Remember today's date, July 7th. There's a cozy cafe around the corner on the highway. You'll like it. Exactly 1 year from now, in that cafe, you will give me your answer. Agree to become my wife. Deal? No one had ever joked with Natalie like that. She was in shock. For a moment, she was even flustered. Such audacity, such pressure. But she wasn't going to lose face even in such an ambiguous situation. She took her purse from the man's hand, with a theatrical gesture took out a small fan, unfolded it in all its glory, and began fanning herself dramatically. Then she rolled her eyes and extended her hand to Brad. My name is Natalie. It's a deal, my knight. What time are we meeting here in a year? It was impossible to fool Brad with such a trick. His answer was quick and brief. I'm ready to write down your phone number so you can fulfill the other part of my wish, to see you daily. On that hot summer day, through golden or gloomy autumn, in winter frost and snow, in the heart of lush spring bloom, Natalie shook her ruffles and smiled playfully. And you, Brad, are no fool. Command, where will we see each other tomorrow? From then on, both were swept up, taken captive by daily meetings. They both strictly followed the rules of a certain game. One day replaced another, and Brad and Natalie always hurried after work to see each other. They got to know each other gradually, from under the veil. And Natalie soon discovered, to her surprise, that a day without Brad turned into an agony of waiting for a meeting. The young man was a man of few words, speaking about himself without enthusiasm. School, army, institute, an engineering diploma that didn't warm his soul and didn't become a reason to look for a job in his field. He admitted sparingly that sports and activity were more familiar to him, so he always planned to also graduate from a physical education institute. There shouldn't be any delays. He was a candidate master of sports in freestyle wrestling and also in swimming. His parents always worried a lot about his health. There was never money in his family for paid clubs and sections, but even in school, he was sent to all possible and impossible training sessions one after another. Especially since coaches almost everywhere found his physical capabilities very promising. Only his height seemed a bit too much to them. Almost 6 feet 7 inches. That's not convenient for every sport. Brad drifted around, went to gyms and swimming pools, until he received the title of candidate master. Then, as if on cue, army service came up. After its end, he was persistently offered to stay and work further under contract, but he hurried home, where his affairs awaited. Natalie couldn't extract many details about her friend's past life from him. They met in the summer and probably looked like a very strange couple from the outside. A somewhat Turgenev-esque, sentimental young lady and a huge bruiser with massive fists. Natalie didn't even tell her friends or parents about Brad. And all because he was winning her heart very slowly, didn't pester her, and didn't try to get handsy when he tenderly hugged her goodbye. And when the lively Natalie couldn't stand it and ask him about all these oddities, he explained. You've become very dear to me, and I treat you with reverence. I don't want to rush anything. Even if you decide I'm not bold or experienced, I'll have time to prove you wrong later. Natalie herself had very little personal experience in her feminine piggy bank. She didn't count the silly game of spin the bottle back in school, where she kissed half the boys in her class. That was only on the surface. She was all businesslike and decisive on the outside. In reality, she had never had a boyfriend or a man. It just happened that way. At first, her parents didn't give her any slack, forced her to come home early from youth gatherings, made sure she didn't get into drinking and certainly didn't try any substances. As a result, Natalie wasn't exactly a blue stocking by modern standards. She was advanced in many matters, but more theoretically than practically. She just didn't plunge headfirst with anyone if she saw the situation was shaky. She disappeared. That's what happened once at a picnic with friends out of town. The host announced, "Guys, we are partying to the max." The other guys and girls took up the call in their own way. Everyone quickly got tipsy on champagne, split into couples, and dispersed to separate rooms. Natalie also got an escort, quite a handsome one, actually. But when she found herself alone with him behind a closed door, the thought that it was time for her to try didn't arise. She announced she was thirsty and excused herself to get something to drink. She didn't return to the room. She slept until dawn on the back seat of her car, In the morning, that guy demonstratively twirled his finger at his temple, hinting she wasn't of this world, stuck with her notions in the Stone Age. She was only being offered to relax a bit, no strings attached. No one, was seriously vying for her attention anyway. That insignificant incident taught Natalie to be even more selective. She went out with company less and less, at most to clear-cut girls' nights. It got to the point where even Helen began to tease her. "Sweetie, with your busyness at work and your love for reading, haven't you sentenced yourself to a life of celibacy? Don't do it. You don't even go with me and Dad to family celebrations with our acquaintances anymore. There are many promising grooms from our circle there. Be a dear. Don't forget that your father and I still want to have time to babysit grandchildren." Natalie immediately cut off such conversations with her parents. An inner feeling persistently told her, "You will have everything. A beloved man, a family, and children. You just need to be patient and wait. Your happiness won't pass you by." Natalie believed in herself, and when she met Brad, she almost immediately understood. This is it. That true feeling that happens between a man and a woman. That sincere attitude from a partner when you know for sure he lives and breathes only you. You unconditionally believe and trust him, even with the most intimate. Natalie now often thought, "It's so good I didn't waste myself on emptiness. Brad is the man fate intended for me. I never thought about such things before, but with him, I would want to have a church wedding, to raise our little ones together." Natalie and Brad became intimate on New Year's Eve, and that was a great revelation for her. She had no one to compare her first man to, but something told her that such an abundance of tenderness was not something every woman got to experience. In the morning, her big and strong knight brought his chosen one breakfast in bed. The sausage and cheese were cut a bit clumsily. The tiny coffee cup seemed like a thimble in Brad's hands. On the dessert plate were 2 bright egg yolks on a white pillow of slightly browned whites. And it was all touching to the point of giving her goosebumps. Brad then looked into her eyes and asked, "You don't regret anything, my love? Could you understand that if I don't know how to say all those important words, I will try to show you my love through actions?" When Natalie arrived at her parents' country house on January 1st, even her skin glowed with happiness, let alone her eyes. Her mother and father immediately understood. Their daughter was facing important changes in her personal life. They bombarded her with questions. "Natalie, you've met someone, haven't you?" That was, of course, Mom, Helen. "Bring the groom to meet us," boomed her father. Natalie didn't go into details with her parents yet, but nodded happily. "I've met my man, dear ancestors. The one I want to be with for life, in any circumstances life offers. Did he propose to you?" Helen immediately inquired. "Yes," Natalie confirmed. "On the very first day we met. But I haven't given him an answer yet. I'm thinking." "Something bothering you?" Nicholas immediately worried. "Is he at least from a decent family?" Natalie interrupted the flow of questions with just one decisive gesture and words. "Enough. His family is the most ordinary, but his soul and heart are amazing. I will bring him here for you to meet at Christmas. And whatever impression Brad makes on you, know one thing. It won't change anything in my relationship with him. I've already made my choice." The first meeting with the future in-laws turned into a real trial for Brad. It didn't help that Natalie kept whispering encouraging things in his ear. Her parents were extremely reserved. But then onto the veranda, where everyone was sitting over lunch, came old Nick, the family's universal favorite, a huge St. Bernard who had long lived with Natalie and her parents. The dog's behavior this time was very unusual. He purposefully walked up to Brad and laid his big head on his lap, calmly allowed the guest to pet it, and sighed attentively and, as it seemed to Helen and Nicholas, approvingly. From that moment, the ice between them and Brad cracked. They both somehow quickly understood that their daughter had not made the worst choice of companion. Even Nick approves. There were more meetings later. Now the older generation even let Natalie go on trips with Brad for a couple of days without doubt. And while their daughter wasn't home, Helen kept reasoning. "As a man, this Brad is very attractive. I understand Natalie as a woman here. She looks next to him like a little Thumbelina. With someone like that, she'll never be scared anywhere." And the story of their meeting is proof. Nicholas sometimes caught himself thinking he was a bit jealous of his daughter. Before, he himself was her idol and example of a real knight. Now the priorities had shifted. But he was a reasonable man. He understood they couldn't keep Natalie near them with her mother all her life. It seemed the time had come to give her into other reliable hands. He would just arrange one more test for the future son-in-law, and if he passed it with honor, the wedding would happen. Natalie automatically laid out forks and knives on the table, while Brad and her father busied themselves at the grill with all sorts of tasty things. All preferences were considered. For the men, something heartier. Pork and lamb kebabs. For her and Mom, red fish on the grill. For everyone together. Mushrooms, potatoes, vegetables. The feast was an occasion. Before the big, lavish wedding, everyone had a light case of nerves, each worried about their own things. Helen kept thinking about the guests. Had they forgotten to invite anyone? Missed some important person on the list? The bride's thoughts were different. She definitely wasn't afraid she was making the wrong choice. Something else worried her. Brad was a man of few words. She was used to that by now. But it seemed to her that for the last few days, some sorrow had been troubling him. He brushed off her questions, but she felt in her gut he wasn't his usual self. Could the eternal male fear of wedding rings and a passport stamp have caught up with him, too? She never doubted her chosen one was brave. But did that apply to marriage? Maybe she was overthinking things. After sending Brad with the skewers to the table, Nicholas went to the wine cellar, went down, and disappeared. The appetizing dishes on the table were even starting to get cold. Concerned, Natalie went into the garden where the cellar was to call her father to the table sooner. Silence answered her call from the darkness. But from the other side of the yard in the garage, it seemed a flicker of light from a flashlight was dancing on the walls and ceiling. Natalie hurried there. Her sneakers made no sound, and the person near the car was so engrossed in something he didn't see the young woman. Natalie managed to think. No stranger could have gotten into the yard. The fence was quite high on all sides. And Nick was only friendly with his own. He'd growl at a stranger so much it would be no joke. Could Dad be doing something with Brad's car? Her and Mom's cars were parked further away, not right at the entrance to the garage. Natalie stood on her tiptoes, curiosity overwhelming her, a swarm of guesses buzzing in her head. Dad is preparing some other surprise for the wedding. That's why they invited us for barbecue today. What is he doing there that's so mysterious? Reality was akin to a bucket of icy water. Natalie caught her father red-handed, and it wasn't with another gift in his hands. In his hands was a miniature portable camera. She knew this model well from work. They used such equipment for covert filming in the most unexpected places for work. She couldn't be mistaken. She laughed loudly. "Dad, what are you doing? How could you? Don't you trust your own daughter, her future husband? What do you want to film in secret? You're like a partisan behind enemy lines, I swear." Nicholas slowly turned to his daughter and explained, "Your mother has something unsettling her soul, sweetheart. It's like everything is perfectly transparent and smooth with you and your fiancé, but her heart isn't at peace. And we trust our daughter completely. You can have no doubt about that. You're still so young. I'll only be glad if the movie this little thing shoots for us is innocent and harmless. But still, listen to your father as a more experienced person. Let's leave it. After all, if Brad isn't hiding anything up his sleeve, he has nothing to fear. We'll laugh about my manipulations together later." Natalie was about to jump to her beloved's defense again, but then the image of that morning flashed before her eyes. Brad's confused, absent look when he hesitated to answer whether he wanted tea or coffee for breakfast. A couple of seconds later, he briskly joined the dialogue with her, but a second before that, he was clearly on some other planet. So here she was, Natalie, about to find out what secrets were causing her fiancé to fret before the wedding. Let time tell. Natalie took a step forward and decisively stated her only condition. "Dad, Brad mustn't know about this camera. I don't want to start my life with him with an act of distrust. He hasn't deserved that." They returned to the table a bit sullen but, sensing the aromas of roasted meat, greens, and vegetables, eventually thawed. The conversation over the delicious meal soon turned in the right direction. The last details and little things before such a solemn day were discussed. Finally, Helen clarified once more if Brad's parents would come to them a couple of days earlier. They had agreed on that preliminarily. He confirmed his parents' intention to help somehow, and with that, everyone parted. Time began its countdown to the wedding. 7 days and so on. And 2 days before the wedding, Brad warned Natalie in the evening that he had work matters out of town and wouldn't be back all day, only by evening. The bride had a beauty salon, manicure, pedicure, and refreshing cosmetic procedures scheduled anyway. The groom wouldn't be underfoot. On that note, they went their separate ways. Brad returned, as it seemed to Natalie, gloomy again, but it was clear he was making an effort to hide it. They had dinner in silence. Natalie pestered her beloved with questions but decided to take her own path. For the last 2 months, they had been living together in a rented apartment. They decided to start using her parents' gift, the studio apartment, after the marriage registration, while cosmetic repairs were being done there. The car given to the future son-in-law ahead of time stood in the yard under the windows. When Brad fell asleep, she checked the recording device and then watched everything that had been recorded on it. The picture on the tape was impossible, incomprehensible for a man who was supposed to go to the registry office in 2 days. First, Brad drove on the highway for quite a while, then turned into some village, stopped only once, went into a minimarket, and came out with 2 hefty bags. It was impossible to make out what was in them. It seemed to Natalie they were some groceries and juice cartons, but she wasn't sure. Then gates swung open in front of the car. Brad drove onto the grounds of a strange institution. In the yard, people were strolling leisurely. Many moved in wheelchairs. A similar mobile device, accompanied by a woman in medical uniform, also approached Brad's car. Brad jumped out of the driver's seat, hurried to help transfer a pretty young woman into the car. Then they drove away from the sorrowful yard, where everyone around was sick, limited in their physical abilities, to freedom. Outside the car window, steppe landscapes, forest belts, and fields of agricultural crops flashed by. Brad brought the stranger to a clearing near a field with daisies. He picked a whole armful of flowers for her, laid them on her lap, then carried the woman in his arms to a fallen tree trunk, having first taken a plaid blanket from the trunk. Brad's vis-vis was telling him something and crying. Here the recording was unclear, the conversation couldn't be heard. Then Natalie's fiancé arranged a beautiful picnic in nature for this strange companion of his. The camera recorded scenes in snatches, only where it had a view. Clearly visible was the woman eating a large sandwich with butter and salted red fish, washing it down with juice. Soon she began to smile, reached out her hands to Brad. He picked her up again and carried her around the clearing, showing her something here and there. Natalie paused the video playback, couldn't understand anything. Who was this woman? Why was Brad fussing over her like this? Why didn't she, Natalie, know about this woman? It turned out Brad had a separate life where his future wife had no place. Why then was he planning to go not only to the registry office but also to the altar with her? It wasn't fair. Tears streamed down Natalie's cheeks from hurt, but she mustered courage and watched the recording to the end. The crown of her discoveries was Brad's conversation with the woman, now in the car. Natalie heard it very clearly. Every word, every letter. Brad, I don't know how to live on. I'm with you, my dear little Olga. We'll raise our little one, we'll manage. It seemed to Natalie that an abyss had opened at her feet. What was this? Why was the world so cruel? She didn't deserve betrayal. She burst into the apartment, where her fiancé was peacefully and sweetly sleeping, like a fury. She woke Brad angrily and persistently. She threw the camera with its modest recording right in his face, shouting, "How could you do this to me? And I didn't even believe my mother's doubts about you." She kept saying there was some worm in you, a double bottom no one could reach. And what turned out in reality? You have another woman you were with parallel to me. And you'll have a child together. There will be no wedding. Get out. Ice appeared in Brad's eyes. He didn't explain anything, didn't justify himself, silently got up, and started packing his things. Impassively, almost calmly. His behavior convinced Natalie she was right. She had mistaken her beloved. Her chosen one was shady. He wasn't who he presented himself to be. He had cruelly deceived her trust. They had no future together now. All these arguments Natalie repeated to herself again and again. She was scared, in pain. Why was Brad so stubbornly silent? Didn't stop the flow of her anger, didn't calm her, didn't want to explain anything. When the entrance door slammed loudly behind her now ex-fiancé, her strength left her. Natalie fell and wept bitterly. It would have been better if her father hadn't put a hidden camera in Brad's car. Or maybe such news was better learned on this shore, before managing to put a stamp in the passport, and especially before having a church wedding. Half an hour later, the UN-become bride calmed down a bit, called her parents to say the wedding was off. Helen and Nicholas received her news with understanding. Her father only asked, "Did my camera antics open your eyes to your fiancé? It happens, daughter. I won't question you about anything now. Mom and I will accept any decision of yours. For us, the main thing is for you to be happy and at peace. Believe me, Brad is not the last or only man in your life. You'll still meet your person, and everything will get better." Olga sat in a wheelchair in the shade of spreading trees. Igor had been fussy since morning, and she didn't yet understand. Were his teeth bothering him, trying so actively to appear on the smooth pink gums? Or was his tummy acting up again? Her little boy couldn't yet tell her what caused him obvious discomfort. Good thing he fell asleep so quickly in the fresh air and wasn't whining for now. While Brad went to the store, the young mother could calmly poke around on her phone. Her older brother, born only 10 minutes before her, always loved to boss his sister round. And so, a year and a half ago, he burst into the residential care home for people with limited physical abilities, swept up her things, and took her away to nowhere. Going to their parents was a pointless idea. They had given the girl up to an institution long ago, considering her illness a family defect. That case when one of the twins was found to have a congenital autoimmune disease that couldn't be treated. So why raise such a child and invest in it? The state is compassionate. It will raise him itself. Jean and Zoe. 2 peas in a pod, that pair. In their views on life, in their insatiable drive for consumption. Brad's middle name was Genadevich. But he never learned to love his father and mother, especially when he found out what they had done to Olga. He didn't remember his little sister at all. She was taken from home when they were both 2.5 years old. A quite banal and not uncommon diagnosis. Juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. Olga's immunity simply didn't want to help her, on the contrary. It resembled a vicious beast attacking and destroying the body's tissues, particularly the joints, without mercy. Hearing such a verdict, Jean and Zoe thought hard about their future. What did this mean? Meticulous examination of Olga, who complained of constant leg pains, revealed a multiplying number of antibodies. Zoe and Jean even learned over time to pronounce specialized terms without stumbling. They weren't fools, essentially. More like distinguished by laziness and infantilism. Olga had been behaving strangely, peculiarly, since about age 2. The girl refused to walk, made painful grimaces, as it seemed to her parents, if touched, wasn't interested at all in games or frolicking with peers, started crying as soon as she saw people in white coats, after being taken to the hospital by ambulance again with severe pain. Visiting their daughter and not wanting to stay with her in the hospital long. At home, Zoe looked at the sturdy Brad, cozily sleeping in the huge crib for 2 babies, and thought, reasoned. And who will dare condemn me if I refuse Olga? It must be done decisively, finally, and irrevocably, and my conscience doesn't torment me at all. I come home tired from my shift at the bakery. Jean, after his always so hot forging and pressing shop, should also have the chance to rest, cool his working ardor, relax. It's good that the management of both plants helped so much with Olga's examination. Sent her to the clinic at their own expense, kept a hand on the pulse to ensure the little girl got attention. But further, she and Jean were out. The verdict from the doctors was too harsh. Olga's immunity didn't want to respond to any drugs or improve. It would only get worse. Her will was doomed to a short existence. She wasn't made of iron. The inflammation would increase. The pain would only intensify. The documents for complete termination of parental rights Jean and Zoe signed practically without reading. They were in a hurry to finish with it sooner. The guardianship authorities sent Olga to a specialized medical institution. She could still walk independently then, but was losing ground in that direction more and more. Jean and Zoe visited their reject only once, so to speak, for final conscience cleansing. They were quite satisfied with the care for the girl and themselves. They had made the only right choice. Now they could put a period in this sad story. Colleagues and acquaintances, true, at first still condemned such cruel parents, but time distracted everyone with their own problems. They gossiped and didn't remember anymore. And Jean and Zoe dedicated their time to raising Brad. The boy, as if in contrast to his sister, grew up healthy, problem-free. Years passed, not even fragmentary memories of his sister remained in Brad's memory. He did a lot of sports, studied decently at school, didn't shirk army service, and would have continued through life without much trouble, but one day suddenly divided everything into before and after. Jean and Zoe, after their transgression with their daughter, had long been drowning their anguish and conscience at the bottom of a glass of cheap wine. It's not strong vodka, not high-proof beer. Drink a glass or two after your shift, and life seems rosy. Brad didn't approve of this parental hobby, distanced himself more and more from his ancestors. And then he met a neighbor in the yard after the army, and she asked him an unexpected question. "Brad, it's been over 20 years since your parents gave your little sister Olga to the residential home. Have you heard anything about her? Or have you completely consigned her to oblivion?" Sister? Brad thought the elderly woman from the neighboring entrance was delusional. He was an only child. There had never been other children in the house. The inquisitive pensioner was confusing something. He'd have to ask his parents. And a suitable occasion presented itself very soon. His parents were toasting a bonus. That evening, clearly more than 1 or 2 glasses had been drunk. When he came home from his fitness club, Jean and Zoe were both unable to utter a coherent word. He started shaking his mother, immediately asking her questions point blank. "Mom, how's our Olga? I haven't heard anything about her in a long time." Zoe looked at him with glassy eyes, tried to concentrate on some thought, but failed. "So, son, it's been almost 20 years since we've seen her. Since we got rid of her, we haven't visited. Why did you suddenly remember her? Everything connected with her is ancient history. Out of you twins, we chose the healthy one. In the animal world, the strongest always remains to live. And so you defeated your feeble sister. She's probably not even alive anymore. Why grieve for her? That's her fate." For a moment, Brad thought he was hearing things. He had a sister, and his twin at that. So that's why it always seemed to him that not everything in the house was in its place, that something important should still be here but was lost. He looked around. Drab walls, long untouched by renovation, dust and neglect everywhere. His parents didn't live, they existed. Dull-wittedly went to work in the morning, dull-wittedly drowned their eternal anguish in wine in front of the TV in the evenings. He couldn't even recall their family ever being normal. He went to the movies, circus, and zoo mostly with his class, and later, when older, with neighborhood kids. And Zoe and Jean lived dully, without a spark of joy, like robots. A terrible thought came to him. I don't want to know these vile people anymore. I wish they'd given me up to an orphanage back then, too. They aren't parents, they're spiritual freaks. I'll find my sister right now and be with her. I'll try to do something for my own person. His character had always been decisive and swift, and he had neither the strength nor desire to remain in a house where even the walls were saturated with indifference and betrayal. At his persistent, almost commanding insistence, Zoe found and gave him all the documents still left on Olga. Among the papers was the address of the orphanage from which Brad would begin his search for his sister. Finding a person isn't a needle in a haystack. Within a week, Brad knew there had been no attempts to adopt Olga, that in over 20 years she had changed several institutions. While underage, she was maintained at state expense, and then she had an almost incredible stroke of luck. The girl ended up on the list of those whose stay in a specialized residential home was funded by the charitable foundation of a certain benefactor. Brad dug up his history, too. It all turned out bitter and simple. This rich man's wife also suffered from rheumatoid arthritis. Unlike Olga's parents, the man didn't give up, was always by his beloved side. And he sponsored those who found themselves alone with this misfortune, without support. Brad really wanted to meet this kind-hearted businessman, at least to shake his hand. After all, we all think, everyone around is indifferent to my trouble. Look at people walking down the street with such joyful, content faces. What do they know about true grief and hopelessness? They live serenely and carefree. In fact, such judgment is erroneous. Almost inside every person hides their own pain and problems. Some are accustomed to not paying attention to the difficulties of strangers and even refuse help to close ones. And others, having experienced despair and the trap of obstacles on their own skin, find the strength to think about their neighbor, even a complete stranger. Such a fate befell Olga when Brad found his sister in a quite decent, cozy residential home. The sponsor, knowing the intricacies of this type of arthritis, not only paid for Olga's and 2 other patients' stay in this institution but also helped with new innovative medications. The insidious autoimmune disease didn't disappear, but the drugs provided a state of long remission for now. Brad often thought a lot. How is this? Olga was born with me, lived in our apartment, grew up, and then this terrible diagnosis, and she was crossed out of the family. Her own parents refused her forever, but strangers picked her up, warmed her, saved her. Now I'll do everything in my power so my sister never feels lonely and unwanted again. Imagine erasing the traces so thoroughly. No old photos or other reminders in the house. Only oblivion and nothing else in the souls of the ancestors. Their first meeting was so stormy, emotional, full of tears. Both experienced the same thing. The two halves of the twin had found each other again. The sister believed Brad from his first word that he was her brother, that now she wouldn't be alone in this world. Olga knew extremely little about her family. Only the fact that her parents had once given her into state care, couldn't cope with caring for her. She held no grudge. She had grown into a kind, somehow very warm young lady, with somewhat old-fashioned views on life and quite a pretty appearance. Later, meeting Natalie turned Brad's soul upside down. His sister and his beloved woman, they were very similar in disposition, habits, preferences, even their love for similar outfits. He was going to tell his fiancée everything, but her parents made him very apprehensive. Such people wouldn't tolerate a burden next to their son-in-law. They'd want all his attention to belong only to their daughter. Brad wasn't going to make a secret of having a disabled sister in his life, nor did he intend to burden Natalie with participation in Olga's fate, so he remained silent until the last moment. When he and Natalie started meeting every day, he treated her like a rare exotic flower. Of course, for the time being, he didn't initiate his chosen one into such bitter family matters. He hardly saw his parents, but to avoid unnecessary suspicion, he told them he was getting married and even invited them to the upcoming celebration. Brad planned to tell Natalie everything later. He kept fearing she wouldn't understand, wouldn't approve of his ardent devotion to his sister. He often listened to an old song with the words, "Natalie, soothe my sorrows." The track became almost dear to him. He very much hoped Natalie would understand everything and not leave him forever. At times, his soul was tormented. He so wanted not to wait, to open up to his beloved right now. Let her accept him with all his problems and hopes. But something stopped him every time, and he told himself, not time yet. I can always do it later. Then new trouble happened to Olga. Although he didn't really know if it could be called trouble. Olga fell in love with an intern doing his residency at their care home. There had been many young men in the residential home before, but this future doctor was somehow especially tender and attentive with her, and a puzzle formed in her head. He's also drawn to me. Such infatuation with one's doctor is quite common. But how was Olga to know? In fact, Oleg was learning the basics of soulful communication with people with limited physical abilities. He dreamed of becoming an outstanding psychotherapist, like his father, who earned quite well working through all those gestalts. His first joke to Olga was, "You're Olga, and I'm Oleg. Our names are harmonious." And I considered it a good sign in choosing my charge in this institution. Let's get acquainted quickly. I'm interested in everything about you. You will share with me what worries you. He deliberately didn't continue their dialogue aloud with the phrase, "and will work through all your doubts and sorrows." Why should his patient know more? He would build bridges with this young woman, listen and comfort, then carefully write everything down in his work journal and consult with his father. How to make the patient forget about her disability, about life within four walls under supervision, for a while, to be happy with what she had. He felt sorry for this pretty patient with a romantic soul. With her, he could clearly combine useful with pleasant and achieve significant results regarding her psychological state. Over time, Oleg planned to write a dissertation on such people doomed to eternal limitations, on their psycho-emotional state. For now, he gathered material, peering into his charge's very souls. Olga had never in her life encountered such attention from a stranger, especially a young and very attractive man. Oleg brought her flowers, fruits, sweets, asked about everything at length, and talked himself. He became for her something like a guide to a world full of enticing possibilities beyond the fence, and once he invited her to the city for dinner at a restaurant, having previously arranged with the administration to steal his patient from the residential home for a while. He wanted to take Olga out of her zone of habitual comfort and see how she would behave. It didn't even occur to the intern that he was trying to lure his Cinderella into a magical land, only to later cruelly turn his luxurious car back into a pumpkin. The experiment was worth the candle for his dissertation. He didn't think about the consequences. It was the best day and evening in Olga's life. She sat in her wheelchair by a window table, and no one around cared about her and Oleg. Burgundy roses in an elegant vase, painted fabric napkins, delicate scented candles, subdued music. The rustle and obsequiousness of waiters silently gliding through the hall with trays. Before, Olga had only seen such paradise in movies, and now the best man in the world was sitting across from her, giving all his attention only to her. The wine made her head spin a little, and her beloved red fish with vegetables seemed a divine dish. Olga kept thinking to herself, "So this is what the real world is like, the one my ailment deprived me of. I won't ask the heavens why I was given such a fate. I'll enjoy every moment granted to me and Oleg on this amazing evening, and I'll go down this path to the end." She got drunk quickly but persistently asked her escort to order the red bubbly drink again and again. She had tasted champagne at the residential home on New Year's. But how could 100 milliliters of the champagne allotted to patients on a holiday compare to the delight this wonderful sparkling wine evoked in her now? Oleg didn't stop his companion. All her psychological quirks at this table were important to him. He experimented, she obeyed. 2 hours later, he realized he had overdone it with his idea. His lady was so drunk she no longer assessed what was happening. Mentally cursing himself for not thinking about such consequences beforehand, Oleg took his charge to his home, his bachelor's lair. He had to carry the patient into the apartment in his arms. She was completely unconscious, but Oleg was a strong man and managed. At home, he quickly put Olga to bed, covered her with a blanket, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. He would have to stay on guard that night. God forbid Olga felt unwell, then he wouldn't avoid work troubles. He came to his senses in the morning, lying next to Olga, who trustingly hugged his neck. He didn't remember falling asleep or how he ended up next to her. As soon as he stirred, she immediately opened her eyes and whispered, "Oleg, don't go. I love you very much. Please, be my man. Make me happy. I promise no one will ever know about this." Such an offer completely stunned the young doctor. He thought, this is the end. The end of everything. Work, career. Why did I drag her to my home? Why did I come up with this restaurant outing? Father will be very displeased with all I've done. Olga immediately understood, felt in her heart. Oleg didn't love her. She was unwanted again. She really needed to use the toilet, but she knew she'd have to crawl there. She couldn't manage alone. She didn't know where her wheelchair was now and didn't remember how she ended up in this apartment. The urge became more and more painful, and Olga wept bitterly. She was even ashamed to admit to the doctor what was troubling her so acutely. Displeased with himself, Oleg finally saw something was wrong with his guest. He rushed to find out, and she finally told him the reason for her hysterics. And then the dam of restraint broke. Oleg quickly picked her up, carried her to the toilet, and sat down right on the floor outside the door. Only now did he feel the full depth of hopelessness that limited physical ability represented. Eternal lack of freedom, constant dependence on someone, desperate courage to admit you're so helpless and weak in something that is simple and elementary for any other person. Oleg knocked on the door, asked if he could carry Olga back. She said she was ready to return to some solid support. While he carried her back, she managed to kiss him, a naive, childlike touch. And Oleg was swept away, responded to her, and then went further. He remembered her request. Olga didn't tell her brother about what happened. It happened, and that's it. No need for him to know her little feminine secrets. Oleg disappeared from their care home immediately. Rumor had it he transferred to another place for his residency. After that evening and night, they drove to the residential home in silence. Both were thinking their own thoughts. Both knew it was better not to recall this incident for various reasons. Such an act could cost Oleg his career. Olga might not be allowed out the gates or lose her support for violating discipline. Olga realized she was pregnant not immediately. She wasn't a dark, ignorant person but hadn't even considered that one accidental date could so quickly lead to such consequences. The attending physician was shocked by the news, almost shouted, "What were you thinking? Pregnancy will worsen your overall condition 3 to 5 times. I'm not sure you'll be able to carry this child to term safely. And you're already over 12 weeks. What am I supposed to do now? Tell me, my dear." Olga looked up at him. "I will give birth, no matter what it ends up meaning for me." I'll call my brother now, and we'll decide together how I am to be and live further. I'm very grateful to the residential home for years of comfortable stay. My brother has long been persuading me to move in with him. Seems like that moment has come. I'll meet with him soon and inform you of my decision. Brad's trip to Olga for an important conversation was later captured by the hidden camera. Brad received the news of the imminent arrival of the baby with enthusiasm. His sister had already endured so much loneliness in this life. It was time to share her burdens with her. Brad visited his sister no more than once every 2 weeks. He worked a lot, substituting for other trainers at the slightest request. He really wanted to buy his wife an unusual gift and give it to her during their wedding trip. And presents and sweet surprises for his sister also cost a pretty penny. He was no gigolo in spirit. He resisted the gift of a prestigious foreign car for a long time. But Natalie's eyes shone so when she saw him behind the wheel of that car that he gave in. After all, not everyone on this earth is rich. He was getting married and would seriously start looking for another job, but for now, he endured. Olga's message about her interesting condition mixed up all his plans, but Brad wasn't about to give up. He could handle everything, cope with it all. Natalie's assumption that he was cheating on her, that he had a child on the side, the covert camera ploy, all this was a blow to him, a betrayal of the trust he valued most, so he couldn't stay by her side. It was foolish and rash. It would have been better to explain everything immediately. Possibly, but people are all different and react differently to stressful discoveries. And so it happened that Brad and Natalie hadn't seen each other for a year and a half now. Only a velvet box with a gift for his young wife reminded Brad of that relationship now. And a huge inner void, filled with pain he couldn't get rid of. Olga had to interrupt all her reminiscing because Igor stirred in his stroller. Brad was always busy with work, but today he had a day off, and they had given the nanny the weekend. Now Olga was preparing for a serious talk with her brother. The nanny had started cleaning the apartment yesterday, reached into the closet, and a bag with a small velvet box fell out on her. The 2 women couldn't resist, peeked inside, and were delighted with the exquisite gold bracelet with precious stone inlays. A thought immediately flashed through Olga's mind. Brad bought this for his fiancée Natalie, but for some reason never gave her this luxurious present. A year and a half had already passed since their wedding fell apart, and Olga still didn't know the true reason for the rift between the would-be newlyweds. Brad was silent, and she didn't dare question him. The only thing that didn't give her peace, then or now, was her brother's state. It always seemed to her he wasn't living, just existing. Today she would put all the dots over the i's. He had taken Olga from the residential home on the very day his wedding was supposed to take place. Rented a small apartment for them on the outskirts, in a residential district. Was by her side throughout her entire pregnancy, literally carried her in his arms to all the offices during tests and medical checkups. The doctors threw up their hands. Olga's interesting condition didn't worsen her state regarding her chronic autoimmune disease. After long-term medication, her remission remained stable, neither worse nor better, and that was a gift in this situation. Brother and sister disagreed on only one thing. Olga flatly refused to say who the father of her child was. Didn't want any confrontations with Oleg. Still loved her doctor but preferred not to elaborate to Brad. She was quite happy. Not every woman with her illness would dare to have a child. Before, she was all alone, but now she had her brother nearby and her little son. If only Brad could also find his match, not remain alone. The bracelet found in the closet pushed her to a very desperate and daring act. She knew how to help her brother and would stop at nothing. Oleg lazily scrolled through his social media feed, whiling away free minutes on duty watching a kaleidoscope of videos. When his phone screen lit up with an unknown number, he first decided not to answer. He was already pestered with loan offers and invitations to dental clinics with good deals. But after a couple of minutes, the unknown caller started calling him again and again. Nothing to do. Oleg switched to answer the incoming call. A melodious female voice immediately sounded in the receiver. Oleg Vitalievich, this is Olga, your patient from the specialized residential home for people with disabilities. I need help again, and I have no one else to turn to. I don't have many acquaintances in the city, and my movements are limited. Oleg knew nothing about the fact that almost a year ago he had become a father. Olga had kept her promise, concealed all traces of his involvement in her fate. Now she was asking her former doctor for a favor, a secret trip to a suburban village where one family lived. She really needed to meet these people without her brother's involvement. He was already quite ready to refuse the incomprehensible adventure of a disabled woman, but then he suddenly remembered his epiphany near the toilet in the apartment, his thoughts about how dependent on others these people with limitations were. He also remembered his dissertation, which had been stalling lately. What if this trip brought a fresh stream into his work? He'd take the risk, come what may. Surely this Olga wouldn't drag him into. That's it. He wouldn't succumb to her provocations again no matter what. Helen was cooking strawberry jam in the garden right on the stove in the summer kitchen. Nick was the first to respond to the gate bell. And when the hostess opened the door, she didn't have time to do anything before the huge dog put its paws on the knees of the woman sitting in the wheelchair, wagged its tail, and sniffed her face. Only Brad did he accept like that immediately, flashed through the woman's head. "Nick, have you lost your mind? What are you doing?" She spoke in an apologetic tone. "I am Brad's sister." Olga stopped her indignation. "We are twins, only I'm disabled, and he is perfectly healthy. Can we talk?" Helen took a step back into the yard, swung the gate leaf wide open, making an inviting gesture with her hand to Olga, assured, "I am at your complete disposal. Just let me turn off the stove. What did you want to discuss with me?" "I didn't know my daughter's ex-fiancé had a twin sister. He never told us about you. He never told me the reason for the fight between him and Natalie. Only a couple of days ago I managed to find out everything. I don't know why, but it seemed to me I absolutely had to come to you and tell about that very woman of Brad's, the one he was with at that ill-fated picnic. That woman was me. I was expecting a baby then, and my brother completely took upon himself all the cares for me and my child. As you can see, I'm not very mobile. Natalie came to her parents' house that same day, as if sensing something. Someone else's car stood at the gate, in the driver's seat of which an unfamiliar young man was looking at something on his phone. Natalie shrugged in surprise. They had guests. Who could it be? In the yard, her mother and that very woman in the wheelchair she had seen on the camera that time met her. Natalie's heart sank. Something had happened to Brad. Why was this woman here? But Helen, smiling encouragingly at her, hurried to reassure. "Meet, daughter, this is Olga, Brad's sister. They turn out to be twins. Can you imagine? Your father and I, together with you, made many mistakes, destroyed your never-realized marriage, drew hasty conclusions, rushed with radical actions. But you know what I want to tell you. As long as people are alive, they are capable of correcting any, even the most serious, mistakes. I've already invited Olga, her little son Igor, and I hope Brad to visit us this weekend. I know you couldn't forget him. And now Olga's story has strengthened my confidence that you can still become happy. A person who is so devotedly and selflessly devoted to his sister cannot be bad a priori. I'm glad, Natalie, that your heart once chose Brad." They parted warmly. Olga was sure she could persuade Brad to cross the threshold of this house again. In the car, she looked once more at Oleg, carelessly listening to music on the radio and twirling his phone in his hands. No, she wouldn't tell him about Igor. It was pointless. This man wasn't worth her brother's little finger. And that Natalie would finally soothe all of Brad's sorrows, she had no doubt.